With this, we begin our first session for today's conference, ASEAN's Challenges in a New Geopolitical Era. Our first distinguished speaker today, a world-renowned economics professor, innovative educator, best-selling author, and global leader in sustainable development, hailed by the New York Times as probably the most important economist in the world, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jeffrey D. SACHS.
Thank you very much. And I hope that you can hear me. We've been battling technology a bit, but I think that we have finally succeeded. Maybe the nature of success is a good lesson. When all else fails, turn off your computer, turn it back on. I hope that I'm being heard. Am I being heard? Am I being heard?
Yes, Dr. SACHS.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So the solution in the end was to turn off the computer and to turn it back on. If we could do that with my government in the United States, turn it off and turn on a new government, we would have a better world. So maybe there's a good lesson in all of this. We are in the midst of a colossal global crisis, and ASEAN obviously is very much affected by this massive global crisis. And I wanted to sort out as best I can a little bit of the challenge right now in just the few minutes that we have. I think that we are in the midst of a new geopolitical alignment and a new world taking shape. And the COVID crisis is not only a terrible crisis in its own right, but it is also making visible some of the incredible facts of our world right now. And also it is accelerating some of the geopolitical change. So the first fact that COVID-19 is making very clear, if we didn't know it already, is that we are in a massive global environmental crisis. In fact, we are in 4 simultaneous massive environmental crises. The fact that we have this epidemic disease is itself part of the environmental crisis because, as you know, we have been having wave after wave of newly emerging diseases that result from the way that human beings are intervening in the environmental systems. And new viruses and other pathogens are spreading from animal populations to human populations because of the dislocations of nature. In this case, a virus has spread from bats to humans and from humans to a world pandemic. And this is crisis number 1. Crisis number 2 is climate change, also related to the massive dislocations that humans are causing on the planet. We have extreme storms, more typhoons, more heat waves, and changing disease patterns because of the human-made climate change. Third is massive destruction of habitat, such as the deforestation in the Philippines and the deforestation over much of Southeast Asia. And the fourth environmental crisis is mega pollution, the pollution of chemicals, the pollution of the air, the pollution of the oceans with plastics. So this environmental catastrophe is bearing down on us now. And this is disrupting the entire world. In the United States, we have 3 massive environmental crises occurring simultaneously today. So we have the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a hurricane striking the Gulf of Mexico, probably hitting Texas or Louisiana within a few hours. And we have the whole Pacific coast on fire with massive forest fires in California, Oregon, and Washington State. This is rather depressing and rather remarkable. But it is also related to a common fact, which is that our governments, and in my case, the United States, President Trump, is ignorant and in denial. And so we have had these crises building, but this stupid man that we have as President of the United States says today it's going to get colder. Just like he said a few months ago, the virus would go away. It's shocking to have the 330 million people of the United States so devastatingly affected by the ignorance of one person, but it's actually affecting the entire world right now. So this is massive crisis number one. Massive change number two is the technological changes underway. These are disrupting the whole world economy, even aside from COVID-19. The digital age is upending the way the world economy works. Those countries that are in a strong position to be leaders in the new digital era are getting ahead. Those countries that depend on labor-intensive manufacturing and are not advanced digital societies are going to fall further and further behind. And COVID-19 has accelerated dramatically this shift to the digital world. Related to these is the geopolitical change. The United States was a world leader until recently. The complete incompetence of the US government, however, shows that the United States cannot lead anymore. And the nationalism and selfishness of the Trump strategy of America first shows that the United States is also not worthy of leadership anymore. At the same time, China, as a rapidly rising power, and one, incidentally, that was able to get the pandemic under control quickly, has had a rebound of the economy and growing economic strength, and I believe growing geopolitical strength as well. So this is a complicated world because we are in the midst of three huge, complex changes: environmental, technological, and geopolitical. Now, if we were rational and well-governed, we would actually find a way through this without massive pain and suffering. The epidemic, for example, is itself controllable through rational policies. Indeed, throughout almost all of Southeast Asia, other than the Philippines and Indonesia, the virus is essentially under control because very serious public health efforts were made in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, and these have kept the transmission of the virus to a very low level. So the good news is it's possible to control this pandemic. And I very much hope that the Philippines could learn the lessons of the neighbors all around you, north, south, to Australia, New Zealand, to your neighbors in ASEAN, to get this epidemic under control through serious public health means through testing, contact tracing, quarantining, physical distancing. It's possible to contain the epidemic. Similarly, it is possible to stop human-induced climate change by moving decisively to a renewable energy economy. In the Philippines or in the United States, to move to wind power, solar power. In the case of the Philippines, massive geothermal energy makes it possible, in fact, all over the world, for countries to make the transformation from the fossil fuel-based economy that is causing the climate change to a safe, renewable energy system. Once again, if we had serious, rational, consequent governance in our countries, we would be making a steady transformation in the right direction. But instead, in my country, you have a president who is in complete denial, basically because he is a liar about climate change. And now we have the largest state in the country in massive blaze and massive loss of life taking place. So again, a rational strategy would allow a solution. Similarly, the digital economy, phenomenal opportunities, positive opportunities for us, because with universal access to digital technologies, it would be possible to have distance education, e-governance, e-payments, e-commerce, telemedicine, internationalization of skilled labor through online work, and so forth. And this would all tremendously facilitate economic development. But that requires a serious program of action to ensure digital coverage for all people. We don't have that in the United States, and I'm afraid that the same is true in the Philippines and in other countries as well. It matters. So my view is actually rather straightforward, and I'm expressing it in a very short period of time because I know time is limited and I got started late because of the technology, and I apologize. Governments need coherent, professionalized strategies to implement sustainable development. Today, that starts with containing the COVID epidemic through serious public health interventions, not comprehensive lockdowns, but the measures that I spoke of earlier, which need to be systematic, data-based, and comprehensive, just like in the neighborhood of the Philippines. Second, countries need comprehensive strategies to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are a holistic approach to ensure universal access to healthcare, education, infrastructure on a gender parity basis. And this too requires serious planning and step-by-step actions. Plans for decarbonizing the energy system, plans for universal health coverage, plans for universal completion of secondary education. And with these steps, it is possible to make serious economic breakthroughs. Again, in order to do that, one needs clear action plans, milestones, real-time data, and management for results. Of all the Sustainable Development Goals, incidentally, I would say the most important is education. And here I would like to see the Philippines' education move to universal completion of at least secondary for all children, because this will be vital for the Philippines' well-being and its economic development in the future. I titled my brief remarks about ASEAN because I believe that in order to stop the pandemic, in order to make the energy transformation, in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need regional cooperation. We need countries working together on the energy systems, on the land management, on the data systems, and so forth. This is what Europe is doing with its European Green Deal, which is a very impressive action program for the 27 countries of the European Union to coordinate on the energy transformation, the sustainable land use, and the movement to circular economy to reduce pollution. I strongly urge a ASEAN Green Deal that also focuses on the energy transformation, sustainable land use, and reduced pollution. And if ASEAN were to work holistically together in this kind of comprehensive program, a tremendous amount of progress could be achieved. And then I want to close again with the geopolitics. The last thing that the world needs is a Cold War between the United States and China. But that's what my incompetent government in the United States is trying to provoke. It somehow believes that by having harsh relations with China, it can get countries to line up with the United States, oppose China, and ensure American hegemony globally. Well, this is, of course, a fantasy, and a very dangerous, and especially dangerous for ASEAN. We don't want a Cold War. We need urgently not only regional cooperation within ASEAN, but global cooperation with Europe, China, Japan, Korea, the United States, all partners of ASEAN, without a new global division. And this is especially important for ASEAN countries because the economic relations with China are of the utmost importance for all of the goals that I've stated. And the Belt and Road Initiative is of strategic benefit for ASEAN if it is carried out properly in a sustainable development manner. So the thrust of my remarks is that we are living in a very dangerous period where we need to think and plan rationally. We need to stop the human-made environmental disasters. We need to use effectively the new technologies and ensure that there is universal access for the digital technologies for all. And we need global and regional geopolitical cooperation. I want more than anything a strong ASEAN, which can be a strong partner for the European Union, for the United States, for China, and a strong enough friend of the United States to say to the United States, no Cold War. We want cooperation on all sides so that we can solve these global problems. Thank you very much for letting me be with you to share a few remarks. I hope that I could be heard. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I wish the Philippines all best efforts and best of luck in containing this terrible pandemic so that you can restore economic development and good cooperation within ASEAN and throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey SACHS. To moderate today's question and answer with Dr. SACHS, joining us via Skype audio, please welcome the adjunct professor at the Asian Institute of Management, Dr. Federico Poch M. Macaranas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachs. It was truly a wonderful experience listening to the very information of the book that implicates ASEAN. We are very pleased that you have shared with us your thoughts about the geopolitical situation in the world, inspired by the sustainable development agenda that was pushed not only for 2030 beyond. While reflecting the question that answered for the is one idea that we started, and that is the role of the United States in making sure that the strong plan will not issues between China and the United States. And right in Washington, D.C., against this ASEAN reform that it not be made to true with the U.S. and China. What are your thoughts on the possibility that this will change the European?
Thank you very much, Professor Poch, and very nice to see you. I believe that it is extremely important for ASEAN as a group, because it's a major countries of great significance, to say very clearly, we do not want a Cold War. We want open relations both with China and with the United States. We do not choose between them, and we do not believe that the world benefits from division and the kind of trade war that the United States is attempting. And I believe also that it would be very important for ASEAN to convey this thought not only to the United States and China, but also to the European Union as well. Because the European Union also does not want to choose between the United States and China. Nobody wants to choose between the two, other than in the nationalist or hyper-nationalist vision of Trump and his cronies. And so this is really a situation where the United States needs to hear very clearly, and the American people need to hear very clearly, we do not want to do Cold War, because that will endanger everybody, and it will diminish the chance for economic recovery for everybody. Whereas if we have cooperation, we can actually get something done. The United States is telling countries in ASEAN, don't buy Chinese equipment, don't buy Chinese technology, don't participate in the Belt and Road Initiative. All of this is nonsense and harmful, and it really should be answered with a very clear message. Do not make us choose, because we have no reason other than to cooperate with all parts of the world. ASEAN's core strategy should be cooperation with all regions and strong internal cooperation as well. And this, I think, can be made very clear, and I believe that by making it clear, it can have a very positive effect.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachs. While we're collecting the questions from the audience, I may follow up on your book. You did say that for ethics in action will be a very critical part of the global public goods strategy. Ethics in action, you call for the moral precepts common to the great religions and faiths, the golden rule, the preferential option for the poor, leaving no one behind, and the protection of creation. This resonates very well with the world's religions, indeed. What are the recent developments on your end for this ethics in action? Are there continuing efforts in regional fora, and not only global fora, so that in Asia, we hammer on this very important ethics in action? Because we have to convince the leaders of this region to really abide by a universal set of norms that the great religions have preached and practiced.
Thank you very much. Just today, I had a conference online with the Vatican about these issues, about the case for a moral framework, for a new global financial system, for justice and mercy, and the fact that in all of the great religions, indeed, there is a common view about what human responsibility and human dignity requires. And so I believe very much that we need this kind of ethical framework, and we need to go back to an old concept that our leaders need to be ethical leaders as well. In other words, our leaders need to behave in an ethical manner and to promote the ethics of their nations. It's almost unimaginable now for the United States, I'm so sorry to say, because we have probably the least ethical president that we have ever had in our history, a tax evader and a chronic liar that is our president. And this is tremendously demoralizing and extremely dangerous, in fact, for our country and I believe for the world. And so my studies have suggested to me that there is a common core of ethics of Chinese culture, Japanese culture, Korean culture, Christian cultures, Muslim cultures, that we can cultivate and use as a common framework of action. And I also believe that with Pope Francis being the world's most important leader in ethics, we have the chance, in fact, to build this kind of global ethics that can help to guide us in a far more fruitful and safe and humane way than we have been going in recent years. In the United States, people thought, well, we need a tough man as president. But when you have a tough man as president, it turns out to endanger the lives of one's citizens. In the United States, we have 200,000 deaths from COVID because, well, we may have a tough man or a man who pretends to be tough as president. He does not have a heart and he has not shown a brain. And without this ethical framework, we are not moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that very, very interesting answer. We go now to the questions from the audience. Returning back to the pandemic, there is a geopolitical shift because China, which has been the source of the original coronavirus, of course, as you said, has recovered economically in a dramatic way. And the question here is, what should the countries in the world do? Should they first concentrate on their own internal pandemic control, or should they contribute also to the international efforts? It seems that countries can have both internal and external ways of solving this. The external, of course, is the vaccine distribution. What are your thoughts on this?
Of course, we need both, each country making the maximum efforts domestically through the public health measures that I indicated. Testing, and there's not enough testing underway in the Philippines, unfortunately. There needs to be much more. Contact tracing, quarantining, where people are infected or suspected to be infected, physical distancing, of course, face mask wearing, safe workspaces, work from home, and so on, to the extent possible. And also stopping large gatherings. which become major ways that the disease. So these are standard public health measures that each country needs to take on its own. The Philippines is surrounded by countries that have actually stopped the pandemic. And I think it would be helpful for China or Korea or New Zealand or other neighbors of the Philippines also help accelerate the suppression of the virus in the Philippines. More test kits, more technical support, contact tracing, and so forth. This would be the national effort. Then I think there should be a regional effort, and I like the regional comprehensive economic partnership grouping that includes ASEAN, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand to work together to reopen trade and movement of people within the RCEP 15-country region. Now, for that to happen, the Philippines and Indonesia will have to suppress the epidemic more than has been done till now. But I would suggest working within this RCEP concept of the 15 countries to look for regional cooperation to accelerate the opening of the trade, tourism, movement of people once again within the 15-country region based on the success of all 15 countries in
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachs. What a wonderful way of saying, indeed, we need to ramp up our own internal efforts and at the same time contribute to the success of regional cooperation in the RCEP, which of course is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that is more favorable to the inclusion of China versus the alternative, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is what the U.S. was pushing all this time.
Just to say, the idea of the U.S. to have an economic partnership in Asia that excluded China was, on its face, incredibly stupid. How could you have an economic partnership that did not include the largest economy of Asia and think that this would somehow be meaningful? It takes a special kind of arrogance, which is American arrogance, to believe in such an idea. And so, of course, we can't have a partnership that excludes China. China's the major trading partner in the region. We need a partnership that includes China. This is self-evident. And no one should think differently.
Right. This brings us to China's own potential in the economic upswing. It is known that India is going to be a major contender in terms of economy. And the question now is, how will the U.S.-China and the China-India standoffs affect ASEAN solidarity for promoting, indeed, the public goods that you described?
I hope that President Biden is president soon and that we will be beyond the very crude attempts by Trump to foment unrest. And if that's the case, while there will be many, many issues between the U.S. and China to be resolved, the idea of creating blocs to oppose each other, I think can be overcome. Just like I don't want a Cold War between the U.S. and China, we certainly don't want a confrontation between China and India. And the United States, of course, is trying to organize a bloc of India, Japan, if the United States would stop this kind of effort, we would find much more common ground as well between China and India, for example, which is important. India should have been part of the RCEP trade agreement. It was a mistake, but I think also probably provoked in part by the United States, as well as by India's internal politics, not to have signed RCEP. But I think that it would be much smarter and safer for India to be part of this agreement and then to look at this vast region of Asia as having, again, the center of gravity of world economic activity. And it would be an extremely positive strategy for the countries involved. So this is what I hope would happen.
And finally, we wish to call attention to what you have noted. The digital revolution is going to be part of the global and regional solutions to this tripartite issue of environment, the physical world, and then the social institutions that make up the world, and of course, the technology that businesses rely on. What do you think is going to happen when China itself relies on American electronic manufacturers to fuel its own growth of the goods that are sold to the world? Will this really also change China's attitude so that it is less confrontational with the US, realizing its own interdependence will be the major factor and not controlling the South China Sea, which is the physical issue of fear being contained by the US in its pivot to Asia? So do you think there must be also a way of convincing China that they must understand the needs of the interdependent world?
Well, the interdependent world is a very important and good idea. But what the United States has done recently, of course, is to say that no company should sell advanced chips to China. So the US is trying to crush Huawei. It's trying to crush the Chinese semiconductor manufacturing sector and so forth. I think that this is, again, a very crude approach. The US is trying to show its dominance. And my feeling is that this does not prove interdependence. It accelerates China's catching up in advanced technologies, because China has many, many skilled scientists and technologists and companies. And I believe that China will be able to close the gap with the United States on the very small nanometer microchips sooner than American strategists believe. And that this attempt to cut China off from US technology will actually accelerate the technologies in China. So I don't believe that we achieve cooperation this way. I think we achieve cooperation through trust and long-term stable patterns of relations, not through trade wars, threats, and deliberate moves to try to organize blocks against China. So I'm fearful of the direction we're going, and believe that it could become very dangerous indeed if Trump is reelected.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. SACHS. And maybe I would like to end by asking, the 7 ages of globalization teach us lessons on the political institutions that govern humankind. What would you think are the most impressive lessons from the 7 ages of 70,000 years that deserve to be studied carefully by all leaders of the world today?
I hope that people will have a look at my new book, because it tries to give a summary of globalization in terms of geography, institutions, and technology, and the interaction of these 3 fundamental dimensions of our lives, because geography shapes the world economy, It shapes our societies and our interactions. Our institutions, obviously, are how we govern ourselves, and technology is perhaps the fundamental driver of change, now the digital technologies. My point is that technological advances can be beneficial for the world, but when they destabilize geopolitics, they can be very dangerous as well. And so because we are in this transitional period, it's especially important that we emphasize cooperation over conflict. That's the main lesson that I take from history.
Thank you very much. Indeed, what we sometimes tell our millennials, you can be friends and enemies at the same time. Frenemy. So this is very contemporary. And thank you very much, Dr. Sachs, for such a splendid explanation of the geopolitical constraints facing Asia, especially ASEAN, as we move towards the major issues of income inequality, environmental crisis, and our geopolitical shifts. Thank you very much again, Dr. Sachs.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you, and all best wishes to all my friends in the Philippines, and thanks to MAP for including me in this session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, and thank you as well to our moderator, Dr. Federico Poch Macaranas from the Asian Institute of Management. Before we move on to the second session, we have a poll happening right now to find out your thoughts and opinions on the conference experience and our sessions. Your answer would be greatly appreciated as we craft our succeeding conferences. PwC, in cooperation with the Management Association of the Philippines, conducted a survey with the country's CEOs and asked them about how they plan to adjust their current business plans and succeed in the changed environment the COVID-19 global pandemic brought. Here are some of their views in the PwC MAP CEO Survey 2020.